Life had a way of lulling you into a false sense of security. For 10 years, Rachel and I had built what seemed like the perfect life. We were the couple others admired, happy, supportive, and in sync. Our 2 kids, Emily and Lucas, brought endless joy to our lives. Emily, with her boundless curiosity, and Lucas, with his infectious laughter, were the glue that held everything together. And then there was our home, filled with warmth, laughter, and a sense of stability. It was everything I'd ever wanted. I ran a small but thriving business, a digital marketing firm I'd grown from the ground up. Rachel, ever ambitious and hardworking, had just landed a promotion at her corporate job. It was a big deal. She'd worked under her boss, Victor, for years, and while I didn't particularly like him, I was happy for her. Victor had always struck me as arrogant, the type of guy who loved the sound of his own voice. But Rachel assured me he was harmless, just a typical corporate shark. I trusted her, so I brushed off my instincts. At first, her new role seemed like a blessing. We celebrated her success with a family dinner, and she was glowing with pride. "This is just the beginning," she told me that night, her eyes sparkling. "We're going to build something amazing together." But soon after, the changes began. It started subtly. Rachel began working late more often, claiming the new role came with extra responsibilities. She'd come home exhausted, her eyes glued to her phone, always answering just one more email. At first, I didn't think much of it. Promotions came with stress, and I wanted to support her. But then, the late nights turned into weekends at the office. The secret of phone calls became more frequent, her voice hushed as she stepped out of the room. I'd ask who she was talking to, and she'd smile and say, "It's just work stuff. Nothing to worry about." But I was worried. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. Rachel was my wife, the woman I had built a life with. We'd been through so much together. Tight budgets in our early years, late nights with crying babies, the ups and downs of balancing work and family. We were a team. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was being paranoid. Then one night, as we were getting ready for bed, I noticed something small but unsettling. Rachel's phone, which she used to leave lying around, was now always face down or tucked away in her bag. When it buzzed, she'd glance at the screen and quickly silence it, her expression unreadable. "Why is your phone on silent?" I asked casually. She shrugged, pulling the covers over herself. "Victor's been sending emails late at night. It's annoying, and I don't want it to wake you." I nodded, trying to let it go, but the unease lingered. Why was Victor emailing her so late? And why did she seem so distracted, even when she was home? The distance between us grew. She seemed less engaged with the kids, missing family dinners and school events with increasing frequency. Emily noticed first. "Is Mom okay?" she asked me one night, her big blue eyes filled with concern. "She's always tired and grumpy." "She's just busy, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "It's her new job. She loves us, though. Don't ever doubt that." But even as I said the words, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. One evening, Rachel came home late again, her makeup flawless and her hair styled in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Big meeting?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Something like that," she said, avoiding my gaze as she set her bag down. She kissed me on the cheek, her lips cold, and headed straight for the shower. That night, as I lay in bed beside her, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions I didn't dare ask. What was happening to us? Was I imagining things? Or was the woman I loved slipping away from me? I wanted to believe it was just stress, that the demands of her new role were temporary. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The Rachel I knew wouldn't shut me out like this. She wouldn't let work take precedence over her family. And she wouldn't lie, at least, not the Rachel I thought I knew. I clung to the hope that we could get through this, that the life we'd built was strong enough to weather whatever was happening. But as the days turned into weeks and the distance between us grew, that hope began to feel like a fragile thread, ready to snap at any moment. The perfect life I thought we had was starting to crack, and I didn't know how to stop it. The unease I'd been trying to suppress was becoming impossible to ignore. Rachel was slipping away, and I could feel it in every aspect of our lives. She was still physically present, coming home late, texting at the dinner table, brushing past me in the hallway, but emotionally, it was as if she was somewhere else entirely. I tried to convince myself it was the stress of her promotion, that the long hours and demanding deadlines were to blame. But the truth was, I didn't believe it anymore. The first real blow came on a Saturday morning. Rachel, who used to love lounging in her sweatpants and oversized t-shirts, had started dressing up every day, even when she wasn't going into the office. That morning, she stepped out of the bedroom in a sleek, form-fitting dress and a pair of heels I didn't even know she owned. "Big plans?" I asked, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. She glanced at me, her tone casual. "Just running errands." "Errands?" In heels and a dress that looked like it belonged at a cocktail party? I wanted to ask more, but something in her demeanor warned me not to. She grabbed her purse, kissed Emily and Lucas on the tops of their heads, and walked out the door without looking back. That was when I started paying closer attention. Her phone, which had once been an open book, was now a fortress. She kept it on silent, the screen always facing down. She'd step outside to take calls, her voice low and filled with a warmth I hadn't heard directed at me in months. Once, I heard her laugh, a light, genuine laugh that made my stomach churn. When I asked who it was, she waved it off. "Just Victor," she said. "He's been unbearable with all the new projects." Victor. That name had started to feel like a curse. A few days later, my friend Derek dropped by for a beer. He was the kind of guy who noticed everything, and he didn't hesitate to speak his mind. As we sat on the porch, the kids playing in the yard, he leaned back in his chair and gave me a look. "You okay, man?" he asked. "Yeah," I said too quickly. "Why? You seem tense. Is everything good with Rachel?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Derek hesitated, his brow furrowed. "I saw her the other night. She was at that new Italian place downtown, with Victor." My stomach dropped. "It was probably a work dinner," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I said them. "Maybe," Derek said carefully, "but they looked close. More than co-workers should." I stared at him, my mind racing. "Are you sure it was her?" He nodded. "Positive." I didn't want to say anything, but I thought you should know. That night, I confronted Rachel. As soon as the kids were in bed, I sat her down in the living room. She looked tired, annoyed, as if even being home was an inconvenience. "Derek said he saw you the other night," I started. "At that Italian place. With Victor." She didn't even flinch. "It was a work dinner," she said, her tone flat. "You know how demanding he is. We were discussing a new project." "Were you?" I asked, my voice harder than I intended. "Because Derek said it didn't look like work." Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you've been acting differently, Rachel," I said, my frustration boiling over. "You're working late, dressing up, taking secretive calls. You're spending more time with Victor than you are with your family." She crossed her arms, her expression icy. "You're being ridiculous, Jonathan. It's my job. I can't just ignore my responsibilities because you're feeling insecure." "Insecure?" I repeated, the word hitting me like a slap. "I'm not insecure, Rachel. I'm trying to understand what's going on with you. You've been distant, evasive." "I've been busy," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under? I'm doing all of this for us, for our family. And instead of supporting me, you're accusing me of, what? Cheating? Is that what you're saying?" The room fell silent, her words hanging in the air like a threat. I wanted to argue, to push back, but the anger in her voice stopped me. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this really was about work. "Fine," I said finally, my voice low. "If you say it's nothing, then it's nothing." Her expression softened slightly, but the distance between us remained. "I'm sorry if I've made you feel neglected," she said, her tone carefully measured. "But you need to trust me, Jonathan. This job is important to me, and I need you to understand that." I nodded, but the unease in my chest didn't go away. I wanted to believe her, to trust that she was telling the truth. But something about her words, her tone, didn't feel right. It was like she was saying what I wanted to hear, not what she truly felt. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The cracks in our marriage were growing, and no amount of denial could make them disappear. I didn't want to admit it, but deep down, I knew the truth. Something was wrong, and it was only a matter of time before everything came to light. The cracks in our marriage had grown into full-blown fissures, and I could no longer ignore them. Rachel's late nights, secretive behavior, and dismissive attitude were eating away at me. Each passing day felt like another weight added to my chest, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came to a head. But no matter how prepared I thought I was, nothing could have braced me for the night everything unraveled. It started with a phone call. Rachel claimed she'd be working late again, finishing a big project with Victor. Her voice was calm, composed, but there was something off, something rehearsed. "Don't wait up for me," she said. "I'll probably be back after midnight." I hung up without responding, staring at the phone in my hand as unease twisted in my gut. This wasn't the first late night she'd spent at the office, but something about her tone made it feel different. It wasn't exhaustion or frustration. It was detachment. I glanced at the clock. It was just after 7 p.m., too early for a late-night project to require a missing wife, and too late for me to keep pretending everything was fine. As I sat in the living room, the kids upstairs playing in their rooms, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was going to confirm my worst fears. Rachel's favorite dress, the one she always wore when she wanted to impress, was missing from the closet. Her phone, which had been glued to her side, was left behind, as if she'd deliberately removed anything that could be traced. That was when I made the decision. No more waiting, no more excuses. I grabbed my laptop and opened the GPS app linked to Rachel's car. She had insisted on installing it years ago when we bought the car, citing safety concerns. Ironically, it was now the tool that would lead me to the truth. Her car was parked at an address I didn't recognize. It wasn't the office. It wasn't a restaurant. It was an upscale condo building on the other side of town. My heart sank as I stared at the screen, my mind racing with possibilities. I didn't want to believe what I already knew, but there was only one way to be sure. I told the kids I had to run an errand and would be back soon. I didn't want to worry them. They didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this mess. As I drove to the address, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My mind was a storm of anger, fear, and heartbreak. What would I find when I got there? And worse, what would it mean for our family? When I arrived, Rachel's car was parked in the lot, confirming what I had dreaded. I stared at the building for what felt like an eternity, my chest tight and my breathing shallow. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, to preserve the illusion of ignorance for just a little while longer. But the other part, the part that couldn't stand another night of doubt, propelled me forward. I walked into the building, the doorman eyeing me with mild curiosity but saying nothing. The elevator ride felt endless, each floor bringing me closer to the moment that would shatter everything. When I reached the condo door, I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Then I heard it, laughter, muffled but unmistakable. Rachel's laugh, followed by a man's deeper chuckle. My heart pounded as I pushed the door open. The sight before me was every bit as devastating as I had imagined. Rachel was sitting on the couch, her legs curled under her, wearing the dress that had been missing from the closet. Victor was beside her, leaning in close, his hand resting casually on her thigh. A bottle of wine sat on the table, 2 glasses half empty. Rachel froze when she saw me, her eyes wide with shock. Victor, on the other hand, smirked, leaning back as if he had been expecting me. "Well," he drawled, his voice dripping with arrogance. "This is awkward." I felt my entire body tense, my hands curling into fists. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. Rachel opened her mouth, but no words came out. Victor, however, seemed unfazed. "Relax," he said, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Why don't you close the door and join us?" His smugness was like gasoline on an already raging fire. Without thinking, I crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall. His smirk vanished as I snarled, "How long has this been going on?" "Jonathan, stop!" Rachel screamed, but I couldn't even look at her. My focus was entirely on Victor, who was finally starting to show some fear. He stammered something about it, not meaning anything, but I didn't care. My fist connected with his jaw, and the sound of the impact was oddly satisfying. Rachel pulled at my arm, begging me to stop, but I shoved Victor away, watching as he slumped against the wall. "You're lucky I don't kill you," I said, my voice low and deadly. "Don't ever come near my family again." I turned to Rachel, who was sobbing now, her face pale and tear-streaked. "How could you?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How could you do this to us?" "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words felt hollow, meaningless. I couldn't bear to hear her excuses. Without another word, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. The sound echoed in the hallway, but it didn't drown out the sound of my heart breaking. Walking out of that condo didn't provide the release I thought it would. My chest felt heavy, my mind racing as I replayed the scene over and over. The smirk on Victor's face, the look of guilt and panic on Rachel's. It was a moment I'd never forget, and the anger boiling inside me wasn't subsiding. It was growing. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel and staring at the dashboard. I couldn't just drive away, not yet. Not without saying the things I needed to say. Not without making sure Rachel understood the damage she'd done. The fire burning in me demanded some kind of resolution, some kind of confrontation that wasn't overshadowed by Victor's smug presence. So, I made a decision. I turned off the engine and walked back into the building, my footsteps heavy with determination. I didn't care if the doorman thought I was crazy or if Victor called the cops. I wasn't leaving this time until Rachel and I faced the truth head-on. When I reached the door, I didn't knock. I turned the knob and walked in, catching them mid-conversation. Rachel was standing, her arms crossed defensively, while Victor sat on the couch, nursing the bruise on his jaw. "Back for round two?" Victor sneered, but his tone lacked the confidence he'd shown earlier. I ignored him, locking my eyes on Rachel. "We need to talk. Alone." Victor started to protest, but Rachel held up a hand. "It's fine," she said quietly. "I'll handle it." He hesitated, then shrugged and grabbed his jacket. "Good luck," he muttered as he brushed past me on his way out. Once the door closed behind him, Rachel and I were left in a suffocating silence. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears, but I couldn't find an ounce of sympathy in my heart. Not after what I'd seen. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice cold and sharp. Rachel wiped at her eyes, her hands trembling. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It started after the promotion. He was always around and I..." "Cut the excuses," I snapped, cutting her off. "I'm not interested in hearing how Victor made you feel alive, or whatever justification you're about to come up with. I want the truth." She flinched at my tone but didn't argue. "A few months," she admitted. "It started with late nights at the office, then drinks after work, and then..." Her voice trailed off, but she didn't need to finish. I could fill in the blanks. The betrayal was clear. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I asked, my anger bubbling to the surface. "To me? To Emily and Lucas? You've destroyed our family for what? For him?" Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't feel any satisfaction in seeing her break. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she said, her voice cracking. I felt like we were drifting apart, like you weren't really seeing me anymore." I let out a bitter laugh. "So your solution was to have an affair? To sneak around behind my back instead of talking to me? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice desperate. "I know I messed up. I'll do anything to fix this." Her words felt like an insult. Fix this? There was no fixing what she'd done. The damage was irreparable, the trust shattered beyond repair. "I don't think you understand," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "This isn't something you can apologize for. You've made your choice, Rachel, and now you have to live with it." She stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "Don't," I said firmly. "You don't get to play the victim here." Her sobs grew louder, but I refused to let them sway me. I'd spent too long doubting myself, too long trying to ignore the red flags. Now, I saw everything clearly. I'm leaving, I said, turning toward the door. And when I get home, I'm calling a lawyer. We're done, Rachel. Jonathan, please, she cried. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every part of me was screaming to get out of that condo, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the woman who had betrayed me. As I drove home, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, disbelief. They all swirled together, threatening to overwhelm me. But beneath it all, there was a flicker of something else. Resolve. Determination. I had spent years building a life with Rachel, but now it was time to rebuild on my own terms. When I walked into the house, the kids were already asleep. I stood in the quiet of the living room, staring at the family photos on the wall. One of them, a picture of Rachel and me on our wedding day, caught my eye. I took it down, staring at it for a moment before setting it face down on the table. This was the beginning of the end, but it was also the start of something new. Rachel had made her choice, and now it was my turn to make mine. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside the window, a stark contrast to the storm raging in my chest. The house was quiet except for the faint laughter of Emily and Lucas playing in their rooms. For a moment, I let myself believe everything was normal, that last night had been a nightmare I could shake off. But reality hit like a sledgehammer the moment I walked into the living room and saw the wedding photo lying face down on the table. I stared at it for a moment, then grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. My lawyer, Ben. He'd helped me set up my business years ago, and I trusted him implicitly. When he answered, his voice was warm and professional. Jonathan, it's been a while. How can I help you? I hesitated for only a second before replying. I need to file for divorce. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'm sorry to hear that. Do you want to come in and talk about it? I'll be there this afternoon, I said. I need this process to start as soon as possible. After hanging up, I took a deep breath and glanced at the clock. Rachel would be back soon, no doubt armed with apologies and excuses. But I wasn't interested in hearing any of it. The betrayal was too fresh, the wound too deep. I needed to take control of the situation, not let her manipulate me into giving her another chance. When Rachel arrived, her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She looked at me as though searching for some sign of forgiveness, but I gave her nothing. Jonathan, she began, her voice trembling, can we talk? Sure, I said flatly, motioning for her to sit, but I'm not sure there's anything left to say. She sat down, her hands wringing in her lap. I know I've hurt you, and I know what I did was wrong, but please, don't let this be the end. We can fix this. I'll go to therapy. I'll quit my job, whatever it takes. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Do you even hear yourself, Rachel? You're saying all of this now, after I caught you. If I hadn't walked into that condo, would you still be saying it? Her silence was all the answer I needed. This marriage is over, I said, my tone cold but calm. I've already contacted a lawyer. I'll be filing for divorce this week. Her eyes widened, tears spilling down her cheeks. Jonathan, please, think about the kids. Think about everything we've built together. I am thinking about the kids, I shot back. That's why I'm doing this. They deserve better than to grow up in a home built on lies. She sobbed harder, but I refused to let her guilt sway me. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about protecting myself and my children from the fallout of her choices. Over the next few days, I threw myself into action. I met with Ben, who assured me the process would be straightforward given the evidence of infidelity. We'll file for sole custody, he said, glancing over the notes he'd taken. With her actions, it shouldn't be difficult to make a strong case. Hearing those words brought a sense of relief. I had been so focused on the betrayal that I hadn't fully considered the custody battle ahead. Emily and Lucas were my top priority, and I was determined to shield them from as much pain as possible. Meanwhile, Rachel continued to send me messages, long, rambling texts alternating between apologies and justifications. She blamed the stress of her promotion, Victor's manipulation, and even my emotional distance. But no matter how many reasons she gave, none of them excused her betrayal. I responded only when it pertained to the kids, keeping my answers brief and to the point. I wasn't interested in engaging with her beyond what was necessary. Every interaction felt like reopening a wound, and I couldn't afford to let her drag me back into the mess she'd created. The kids, bless their innocent hearts, seemed oblivious to the tension at first. But as Rachel spent less time at the house, Emily began asking questions. "Why isn't Mommy here for dinner?" she asked one evening, her big blue eyes filled with confusion. I knelt down to her level, choosing my words carefully. "Mommy and I are going through some changes right now," I said gently. "But no matter what happens, we both love you and Lucas very much. That will never change." Emily nodded slowly, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Lucas, still too young to fully understand, seemed content as long as he had his toys and cartoons. But I knew that wouldn't last forever. At some point, they'd both realize the full extent of what was happening. The first major blow came when Rachel received the divorce papers. She called me immediately, her voice a mixture of anger and desperation. "You're really doing this?" she demanded. "You're going to tear our family apart?" "No, Rachel," I said firmly. "You already did that. I'm just making sure the pieces don't hurt anyone else." Her response was a string of protests, but I hung up before she could finish. I couldn't keep engaging in her drama. My focus had to be on moving forward, for myself and for the kids. As I sat down that night to review the custody documents with Ben, a sense of clarity washed over me. This wasn't the life I had planned, but it was the one I had to navigate now, and I was determined to come out stronger on the other side. The morning after Rachel received the divorce papers, I woke up to a barrage of messages from her. Some were long and pleading, others short and bitter. The pattern was predictable. She alternated between apologizing profusely and blaming me for giving up on us. I didn't respond to any of them. There was nothing left to say. The kids were my priority now, and I couldn't afford to let Rachel's emotional manipulation distract me. The first step was to protect what mattered most: our home, our finances, and, most importantly, Emily and Lucas. That morning, I went to the bank and froze our joint accounts. I couldn't risk Rachel using our savings for anything frivolous, especially now that her lifestyle would be changing drastically. Next, I called a locksmith and had the locks on the house changed. It felt strange, almost surreal, to be taking such drastic measures, but I couldn't ignore the possibility that Rachel might show up unannounced or try to manipulate her way back in. When the locksmith handed me the new keys, I held them tightly in my palm, feeling a mixture of sadness and resolve. This was my home now, and I needed to protect it. That afternoon, I sat down with Emily and Lucas to explain the changes in a way they could understand. It was one of the hardest conversations I'd ever had. Emily, always perceptive, seemed to sense that something was wrong before I even said a word. "Is Mommy okay?" she asked, her big blue eyes filled with worry. I took a deep breath, kneeling down to their level. "Mommy is fine," I said gently, "but things are going to be a little different for a while. Mommy won't be staying here with us, but that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. We both love you very much, and that will never change." Lucas looked confused, clutching his favorite stuffed animal. "Where's Mommy going?" he asked. "She's going to stay somewhere else for now," I explained, keeping my tone calm and reassuring. "But you'll still see her. And no matter what happens, you'll always have me, okay?" Emily nodded slowly, though I could see the questions swirling in her mind. Lucas seemed satisfied with my answer, turning his attention back to his toy. I wanted to shield them from the pain of the situation for as long as possible, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they started to understand the full extent of what was happening. Meanwhile, Rachel was feeling the consequences of her actions in ways I'm sure she hadn't anticipated. Without access to our joint accounts, she was forced to move into a small apartment near her office. Gone were the luxuries she had taken for granted: the spacious house, the comfortable lifestyle, the sense of security. Now, she had to face the reality of her choices. I heard from mutual friends that she was struggling, but I didn't feel any satisfaction in her downfall. If anything, it saddened me. I had loved her once, deeply, and seeing her reduced to this hollow version of herself was a painful reminder of how far we'd fallen. Derek and my sister Samantha became my rocks during this time, stepping in to help with the kids whenever I needed a break. Derek, always the jokester, managed to bring some much-needed levity to the situation. "Man, you've got this," he said one evening as we watched the kids play in the backyard. "Rachel's mess is her own. You're doing right by those kids, and that's what matters." Samantha, ever practical, offered a more grounded perspective. "This isn't going to be easy," she said over coffee one morning. "But you're stronger than you think, Jonathan, and you've got a whole support system behind you." Their encouragement meant the world to me, but the real strength came from within. I was determined to create a stable, loving environment for Emily and Lucas, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. Every decision I made, from enrolling them in extracurricular activities to establishing new routines, was with their well-being in mind. Rachel, of course, continued to reach out, though her tone had shifted. The anger and blame were gone, replaced by desperation. She sent long, heartfelt emails detailing her regrets and begging for another chance. She promised she'd changed, that she'd cut Victor out of her life completely, that she wanted to rebuild our family. But I couldn't let her back in, not after everything she'd done. The trust was gone, and without trust, there was no foundation for a marriage. I didn't hate her, but I couldn't forgive her either. Forgiveness felt like condoning her actions, and I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I focused on rebuilding myself. Therapy became a lifeline, a place where I could unpack my anger, sadness, and frustration without judgment. My therapist helped me see that Rachel's betrayal wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of her own flaws and insecurities. That realization was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. As the weeks turned into months, I started to see glimpses of a new life taking shape. The kids were adjusting, their laughter slowly returning to fill the house. My business was thriving, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose. And though the pain of Rachel's betrayal still lingered, it no longer consumed me. I had taken control of my life, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward. Months had passed since the initial shock of Rachel's betrayal, and though the pain hadn't entirely faded, I could feel myself growing stronger. The house, once filled with tension and heartbreak, was slowly becoming a haven of peace and stability for me and the kids. Emily and Lucas had adjusted better than I could have hoped. Their laughter rang through the house again, reminding me why I was fighting so hard to rebuild our lives. Therapy was helping me more than I'd ever imagined. At first, I'd been skeptical. What could talking about my pain really accomplish? But as the sessions progressed, I began to unravel the complex emotions I'd been burying for months. My therapist, Dr. Carter, had a way of asking questions that forced me to dig deeper. "Have you thought about what this experience has taught you?" she asked during one session. I frowned, leaning back in my chair. "Taught me? Aside from the fact that people can be incredibly selfish?" She smiled gently. "There's more to it than that, Jonathan. Betrayal is devastating, but it can also be a turning point. What have you learned about yourself in the process?" The question lingered with me long after I left her office. What had I learned? That I was resilient, for one. That I could survive heartbreak and still find a way to show up for my kids every day. That I was capable of setting boundaries, of saying no to someone who had once been my whole world. And, perhaps most importantly, that I deserved better. The realization was empowering. For so long, I had defined myself as Rachel's husband, the man who worked tirelessly to support her dreams and provide for our family. But now, I was rediscovering who I was outside of that role. A big part of that rediscovery was diving into my work. My digital marketing business had always been a passion, but now it became a lifeline. I threw myself into new projects, expanding my client base, and taking on challenges that pushed me out of my comfort zone. The success was exhilarating, but more than that, it reminded me of my worth. I was capable, driven, and independent, qualities I had forgotten in the shadow of my marriage. Derek and Samantha continued to be my unwavering support system. Derek, ever the jokester, made it his mission to drag me out of the house at least once a week. "You need to live a little," he'd say, pulling me toward yet another trivia night or happy hour. I didn't always feel like going, but I never regretted it when I did. Being around friends reminded me that life existed beyond the walls of my home and the pain of my past. Samantha, on the other hand, took a more practical approach. She helped me create a new routine for the kids, filling our days with activities that kept them engaged and happy. From weekend trips to the park to movie nights with homemade popcorn, she was always there, reminding me that I didn't have to do this alone. One Saturday, after dropping the kids off at their art class, I found myself with a rare moment of free time. On a whim, I decided to stop by the gym, a place I hadn't visited in years. I wasn't expecting much, just a way to clear my head, but as I pushed myself on the treadmill, something shifted. The physical exertion was cathartic, a release of all the frustration and anger I'd been carrying. By the time I left, drenched in sweat and breathing heavily, I felt lighter than I had in months. The gym quickly became part of my routine, a space where I could focus solely on myself. It wasn't just about the physical transformation, though I did start to notice the changes in my body. It was about reclaiming control over my time, my energy, and my life. Each workout felt like a step forward, a small victory in the process of rebuilding. Then there was Maya. I met her at the gym one evening after a particularly grueling session. She was a personal trainer, her energy infectious and her encouragement unwavering. We struck up a conversation after she noticed me struggling with the free weights, and before I knew it, she was guiding me through a proper routine. "You've got potential," she said with a grin. "You just need someone to push you." Her confidence was refreshing, and over the weeks that followed, our conversations extended beyond fitness. We talked about life, our goals, and the challenges we'd faced. There was no judgment, no pressure, just two people connecting on a level I hadn't experienced in a long time. Maya didn't fill the void left by Rachel. She wasn't a replacement. She was something entirely different. Where Rachel had made me feel like I had to prove my worth, Maya made me feel seen. She listened without interrupting, encouraged without demanding, and supported without expecting anything in return. One evening, as we sat on a bench outside the gym, watching the sun set over the city, she turned to me with a smile. "You've come a long way, Jonathan. You should be proud of yourself." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. "I am," I said, surprising myself with the honesty in my voice. "For the first time in a while, I really am." The journey was far from over, but I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. Rachel's betrayal had shattered my world, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was stronger than I'd ever realized, and I was ready to keep moving forward, one step at a time. I was finally finding my footing again. Therapy, the gym, and the unwavering support of people like Derek, Samantha, and Maya had helped me rebuild a sense of normalcy. My relationship with Emily and Lucas was stronger than ever, and my business was thriving. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe without the weight of Rachel's betrayal pressing on my chest. But just as I started to feel like I was moving forward, Rachel decided to try and pull me back. It started with messages sent through mutual friends. At first, they were vague. Harmless updates slipped into casual conversations. "Rachel's been asking about you," one friend said over coffee. "She says she's really sorry for what happened." I nodded politely, brushing off the comment. I had no interest in revisiting the past, especially not through secondhand apologies. But Rachel didn't stop there. A few days later, Samantha mentioned that Rachel had reached out to her directly. "She's been calling me," Samantha said, her expression a mix of annoyance and concern. "She keeps saying she wants to fix things, that she wants a chance to explain herself to you." "She already explained herself," I replied, my tone sharp. "She made her choices, and now she has to live with them." Samantha nodded, but I could tell she was worried. "Just be careful, Jonathan. She's not above trying to manipulate her way back in." I knew she was right. Rachel had always been good at playing the victim, at twisting situations to her advantage. But I wasn't the same person I had been when this all started. I wasn't going to let her derail the progress I'd made. The next attempt came in the form of an email. It was long, emotional, and filled with promises of change. "Jonathan, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I've made so many mistakes, and I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. But I'm different now. I've been going to therapy, and I've cut all ties with Victor. He meant nothing to me. It was a mistake, a horrible, selfish mistake. I want to fix things, for the sake of our family. Please, Jonathan, just give me one chance to prove that I've changed. Rachel. I read the email twice, my emotions fluctuating between anger and disbelief. She had destroyed our marriage, betrayed our trust, and now she thought a few heartfelt words could erase it all? It felt like an insult, as if she hadn't fully grasped the depth of the damage she'd caused. I didn't respond. Over the next few weeks, Rachel's attempts to contact me became more desperate. She left voicemails, sent handwritten letters, and even showed up outside the house once. I didn't let her in. I couldn't. The kids were my priority, and I refused to let her chaos disrupt the stability I was working so hard to create for them. Emily and Lucas were already struggling with the changes in their lives. Emily, in particular, missed her mother deeply. She asked about Rachel often, her questions laced with confusion and sadness. "Why doesn't Mommy come home anymore?" she asked one night as I tucked her into bed. I sighed, sitting on the edge of her bed and stroking her hair. "Mommy made some mistakes, sweetheart," I said gently. "But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. She just needs some time to figure things out." Emily nodded, but her eyes were filled with questions she didn't know how to ask. Lucas, too young to fully understand, seemed content with the new routines we'd established. But I knew it was only a matter of time before they started asking harder questions. Rachel's desperation reached a peak when she cornered me outside Emily's school after drop-off one morning. I was walking back to my car when I saw her standing by the curb, her arms crossed and her expression pleading. "Jonathan, please," she said, stepping in front of me. "Just hear me out." I sighed, already exhausted by the encounter. "Rachel, we've been over this. There's nothing left to talk about." "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "I know I hurt you. I know I destroyed everything, but I'm trying to change. For you. For the kids." Her tears didn't move me the way they once might have. I shook my head. "It's too late, Rachel. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. I've moved on, and you need to do the same." She looked at me for a long moment, her face crumpling with defeat. "So that's it," she whispered. "You're really done?" "I'm done," I said firmly, stepping around her and getting into my car. As I drove away, a strange sense of peace washed over me. Rachel's attempts to reconnect only reinforced my decision to move forward without her. I didn't hate her, but I couldn't let her back into my life. The trust was gone, and without trust, there was no foundation to rebuild on. That evening, as I sat on the couch with Maya, sharing a quiet moment after the kids had gone to bed, I felt a sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the life I was building, for the people who had stood by me, and for the strength I'd found within myself. Rachel had been a chapter in my life, but it was a chapter one was ready to close. The future was waiting, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace it. The day the divorce was finalized felt like crossing the finish line of a marathon I never signed up for. The courtroom was quiet, the proceedings formal and impersonal, but the weight of it all pressed on me. When the judge ruled in my favor, granting me sole custody of Emily and Lucas, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It wasn't victory, it was relief. Relief that this chapter was finally, officially over. Rachel, sitting a few feet away, looked crushed. Her once confident demeanor had been replaced with a pale, defeated expression. When the judge dismissed us, she turned to me, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something. I didn't give her the chance. I nodded politely, gathered my things, and walked out of the courtroom. Outside, Derek was waiting for me, leaning against my car with a grin that could have lit up the entire parking lot. "Well?" he asked, straightening up as I approached. "It's done," I said simply, the words feeling both heavy and freeing. "Hell yeah, it's done." Derek clapped me on the back, his enthusiasm contagious. "How's it feel?" I thought about it for a moment. "Like I can finally start over," I admitted. "For real this time." Over the next few days, the reality of my new life began to settle in. Rachel's attempts to sway the court had failed, leaving her with only supervised visitation rights. It wasn't the outcome I had wanted for the kids. They deserved a relationship with their mother, but I couldn't ignore the damage her choices had caused. For now, this was the best way to protect them. Emily and Lucas handled the news better than I expected. They were too young to fully grasp the complexities of the situation, but they seemed to sense that the worst was behind us. Emily, ever the little caretaker, hugged me tightly one night and said, "It's going to be okay, Daddy. We're a team, right?" "Always," I replied, my heart swelling with pride. My kids were resilient, stronger than I could have imagined, and they were the reason I kept pushing forward. Around this time, Leah came into my life. She was a friend of Samantha's, introduced casually during a family barbecue. She was kind, intelligent, and had an easygoing nature that put me at ease almost immediately. We started talking, first about the kids, then about life in general, and before I knew it, we were exchanging numbers. Our first date was simple, coffee at a quiet cafe downtown. I was nervous, unsure if I was ready to put myself out there again, but Leah's warmth made it easy. We talked for hours, sharing stories and laughter, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope for the future. Leah wasn't Rachel. She didn't play games or keep secrets. She was open, honest, and incredibly supportive of everything I'd been through. When I told her about the divorce, she listened without judgment, her empathy shining through. "You've been through a lot," she said softly, "but you're here. You're still standing. That says a lot about you, Jonathan." Her words stuck with me, a reminder that I wasn't defined by my past. I was allowed to hope, to dream, to build something new. Meanwhile, Rachel's life continued to unravel. Victor, the man she had risked everything for, had been fired from his position after multiple complaints of misconduct surfaced. He quickly distanced himself from Rachel, leaving her alone and humiliated. Mutual friends told me she was struggling to find her footing, bouncing between low-paying jobs and living in a cramped apartment. It was a far cry from the life she'd once envisioned for herself. I didn't take any pleasure in her downfall. If anything, I felt a twinge of pity. Rachel had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. But I couldn't dwell on her anymore. My focus was on the life I was building, for myself and for the kids. Leah became a big part of that life. She bonded quickly with Emily and Lucas, her patience and kindness winning them over almost immediately. Emily loved showing her the art projects she brought home from school, and Lucas delighted in teaching her the rules of his favorite board games. Watching them laugh and play together filled me with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. One evening, as Leah and I sat on the couch watching the kids play, she turned to me with a smile. "You've built something really special here, Jonathan." "I've had a lot of help," I admitted, glancing at her with gratitude. "And I couldn't have done it without you." She blushed, her smile widening. "I'm just glad I get to be part of it." For the first time in a long time, I felt like the future was something to look forward to rather than something to fear. Rachel's betrayal had been a devastating blow, but it hadn't broken me. It had forced me to confront my insecurities, to reevaluate my priorities, and to rediscover my own strength. As I tucked Emily and Lucas into bed that night, listening to their giggles and whispered conversations, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The road had been long and painful, but it had led me here, to a home filled with love, laughter, and the promise of better days ahead. The morning of Emily and Lucas's first soccer game of the season was bright and filled with the kind of energy that only kids can create. Emily had been practicing her dribbles all week, and Lucas couldn't stop talking about how he was going to be the team's secret weapon. Their excitement was infectious, and as I packed snacks and loaded their gear into the car, I couldn't help but smile at how far we'd come. Leah joined us at the game, her easygoing nature making her a perfect addition to our little team. She cheered loudly from the sidelines, her enthusiasm matching the kids as they played their hearts out. Watching her interact with Emily and Lucas, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Leah wasn't just someone I was dating. She was becoming a part of our family. After the game, we celebrated with ice cream at the kids' favorite spot. Emily recounted her epic assist, and Lucas, despite his team's loss, proudly declared he was the best goalie on the field. Their joy was contagious, and for the first time in years, I felt like life had truly settled into something good. That evening, after the kids were in bed, Leah and I sat on the back porch, the quiet hum of crickets filling the air. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we watched the stars together in comfortable silence. "You know," she said softly, "you've built something really beautiful here, Jonathan. Emily and Lucas are incredible kids. You should be proud." I smiled, my heart full. "I am. But it's not just me. You've been a big part of that." Her hand found mine, and we sat like that for a while, soaking in the peace of the moment. I had spent so long in survival mode, bracing for the next storm, that it felt almost surreal to sit here, in this new life I had built, and feel content. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Between work, the kids' school events, and the slow but steady growth of my relationship with Leah, life felt full in the best way. The scars from Rachel's betrayal were still there, but they no longer defined me. They were a part of my story, but not the whole story. One afternoon, while organizing old paperwork, I stumbled across a photo from my wedding day. Rachel and I stood side by side, smiling, oblivious to the challenges that lay ahead. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, not for the loss of the marriage, but for the dreams we had once shared that would never come to fruition. But then I looked around at the life I had now. The laughter of my kids echoed from upstairs, and the smell of dinner, Leah's homemade lasagna, wafted from the kitchen. This was my life now. Not perfect, but real, full of love, resilience, and hope for the future. Later that evening, Leah and I sat down with Emily and Lucas to watch a movie. Lucas fell asleep halfway through, his head resting on Leah's lap, while Emily dozed off with her head on my shoulder. I looked at Leah, and she smiled at me, her eyes filled with warmth and understanding. "This is what matters," I whispered, gesturing to the kids. "Not the past, not the pain, just this." She nodded, squeezing my hand. "You've done an amazing job, Jonathan. You've given them, and yourself, something to be proud of." That night, after Leah left and the kids were tucked in, I sat alone in the living room, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The heartbreak, the anger, the uncertainty, it had all led to this moment. And while I wouldn't wish that kind of pain on anyone, I realized it had shaped me into the person I was today. Stronger, wiser, and more appreciative of the life I had. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a new email. It was from Rachel. "Jonathan, I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry for everything. I've been doing a lot of reflecting, and I realize now just how much I took for granted. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me, not for my sake, but for yours. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be. Rachel." I stared at the screen for a moment before closing the email. I didn't need to respond. Forgiveness wasn't about letting Rachel back into my life. It was about letting go of the anger and pain that had once consumed me, and I had already done that. The next morning, as I packed lunches for the kids and helped Lucas tie his shoes, I felt a deep sense of peace. The life I had built wasn't the one I had planned, but it was the one I was meant to have. And as I watched Emily and Lucas race out the door, laughing and teasing each other, I knew I had everything I needed. Leah arrived a few minutes later, greeting me with a kiss and a warm smile. "Ready for another busy day?" she asked, her tone playful. "Always," I replied, grabbing my keys. Together, we headed out to face whatever the day had in store, knowing that we had each other and the life we were building. The future wasn't just bright, it was ours to create, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take us.